So I'm sitting in my kids' car pickup line, and I just wanted to get some thoughts out because that's what people do, right? I wanted to comment on something that I posted yesterday that got some interesting replies about pastors who have been pushed out, forced to resign from their churches, and the context of that was broadly evangelical. It was Tom Rainier, who's former Lifeway guy. I think he's still with Lifeway. You can correct me on that. He's written some really helpful things that Rob and I have both appreciated a lot, even though they aren't specific to the context we were in, which is, of course, the Presbyterian Church in America, PCA, which has a very specific governance as opposed to many, broadly evangelical churches that have no governance. Well, I shouldn't say no, but a lot of them just are much more congregational, more, there's a certain body of people who make all the decisions, or, the congregation as a whole gets to vote on things, whatever the case is. PCA, of course, has specific guidelines on these things. So there's the difference between just any church that has kind of a sense of the whole congregation should be allowed to make the decision on whether or not a pastor should stay or not. So there's that. And then I also just wanted to make it really clear that it doesn't mean necessarily just because a group of people come together and feel very strongly that the pastor needs to step down, it does not necessarily mean either way. It doesn't mean they're right, and it doesn't mean they're wrong. The work of the church, specifically the work of those who are in leadership, who have the power, the authority, the spiritual authority to make those decisions, need to absolutely engage in all due diligence for the sake of that church, for the sake of the peace and the purity of that local congregation. Now, that said, what I've found often is that depending on the size of the church, depending on the nature of the allegations, depending on the players involved, and by players I mean who in the congregation is making a stink, who in the congregation is rallying the troops to create division. And I'm saying all that with the caveat that depending on who it is, it gets labeled a certain way. And so we have to be really careful about how we view conflict, how we view complaints or criticism against a pastor. Now, I've only been a pastor's wife for 12 years now. I still consider myself a pastor's wife. That's another conversation for another day. My husband has certainly been through a lot as a pastor. Many of you know us, probably people watching this, you all know his story. And there's absolutely a time for criticism. There's absolutely a time to say to a pastor, I think you're handling this badly. I think what you're doing right now is not helping the peace and the purity and the unity of the church. And I'd like you to consider that. There's absolutely time for that. There's absolutely time for that. Now, that said, you can ask yourself a few questions like, am I the person to do that? Absolutely. We believe in the sainthood of all believers. We believe that everyone can have a conviction of the Holy Spirit and can say, yeah, I feel like I need to say something. And I'm going to approach my pastor in all due respect and humility. I think you need to listen to something I want to bring to your attention. And the pastor, in all due respect and humility, will listen and will say, yes, I hear you. I recognize the problem that you have, the issues that you're bringing to my attention. I will consider it. Or I absolutely, yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm really sorry. It was wrong. I didn't say it the best way I could have. I'm not gonna make excuses for it. Maybe here's some context that you didn't know that I could have done a better job of explaining, maybe. But here's my take on that. So a pastor can absolutely do that with humility and kindness and grace and all the things that makes a pastor a man of character, or a woman of character. And so yeah, we can get to that point where we can just approach a pastor and say the things that we feel need to be said. Now, that said, at some point, if it gets bad enough, or if it becomes so contentious that people are coming together, and Tom Rainier used the phrase negative coalition, which I just thought was so good, because usually, we think coalitions are good things, but they can certainly be destructive things. And so a negative coalition comes together and says, hey, we feel that you need to go, which certainly happens. And to pretend that it doesn't happen is not great. And then to say, to give credence to the way in which these groups do things and the reasons that they bring, can certainly cause a lot of division and pain and harm in the church. And again, depending on what the issues are, depending on who it is, depending on the governance of the church, for where we were, in our denomination, it was the PCA. The PCA has very specific guidelines on how you handle complaints against an elder, and whether or not the church itself engages well in that, and then whether or not the presbytery, the ruling body, engages in that, if they even know what to do, first of all, and then second, if they're trying so hard to play some, both sides, let's bring a quick resolution type of method. They're bringing that method into the presbytery, instead of being careful and diligent, instead of asking the hard questions, instead of jumping to quick conclusions, instead of on the opposite side, maybe it's, drawing the process out so much it becomes so frustrating and just unlivable. It's unlivable for some of these elders who are trying to do what's best for their congregation, and they get blindsided. They get, accused of all these things. Now, that brings me to the crux, I think, of what Tom Rainier posted in the stages of how this happens. I think the absolute most important point was that the allegations are false. The allegations need to be proven. And this is where I did appreciate the PCA, at least in theory. The Book of Church Order very carefully lays out how allegations need to be taken very seriously, and then they need to be scrutinized in such a way that they are either ruled sufficient evidence or slight grounds. That's the term, slight grounds, in which the issue itself is not rising above just, interpersonal conflict, or small potatoes. If it becomes such a big issue that you can't avoid it, or that people are just so disgruntled against the pastor for something he did or said or didn't say or didn't do, and the presbytery comes in, their job is to figure out, is this something worth him losing his job over? And then that's the question. That's where they need to be careful about false accusations or misrepresenting things that have happened, to the point of bearing false witness, because that's the point here that I'm trying to make, is that it's false witness. And false witness is a big deal. Last I checked, it was a big deal to God. False witness is when someone is allowed to say something that isn't true, just flat out not true, or it lacks context, it's misrepresenting what happened, it's only giving half of the conversation, it's in just assigning motives or intentions, like saying this is what this person meant to do, and you don't know that. It's getting the sequence of events wrong. The sequence being, where do you start telling your story? Do you start telling your story in the space where, in the place where you did something wrong? Or is it where the other person did something wrong? And they did something wrong in reaction to you doing something wrong. Two wrongs to make a right. We all know that. But lacking the context of what the first person did could be a big deal. And not pursuing that information is bearing false witness. It's lying. It's a lie. And I think as a church, a lot of churches miss that. We've redefined what a lie is. We've redefined what it means to get to the bottom of things. And we've found ourselves in this time when we're just scrambling to make sense of what's happening, but we want to do it in a way that silences the truth, and we want to do it in a way that diminishes the harm that's being done by lying. And I think that reading through some of the stories I've been told over the years by lots of pastors and lots of wives have reached out to me all on their own because they've seen something I've written. They've said, Robin, this is our story. This is what's happening to us, and we don't get it. We don't get what's happening. We don't understand how these good people, and there's always good people. It's never evil people. It's never the people that are sadistic, right? It's always these good people who are trying to do what's best, but they allow themselves to become so distorted. I mean, it's just a deep distortion of truth and justice. We want to wrap it up with a bow. We want to make things look better than they really are, because we hate it. And it's right to hate it. It's right to hate the division. It is right. It is God's own heart to be heartbroken for the way that our churches crumble in the face of conflict. And whether that becomes just a deep sadness for you, or it becomes deep anger. And both. It's both. So I felt like I needed to say all of that, because it was interesting the types of people who responded to what I wrote, that, pastors are falsely accused all the time. And I just wanted to say yes and no. And it's our job as a church to pursue which one, the yes or the no, every single time. And let the truth come out. And let's be churches that can deal with the fallout of that and enact justice on behalf of those who are the most harmed. And sometimes that's going to be the pastor, and sometimes it's not. That's the discernment.